First, I was asked to discuss what led me to be involved in integrating Arabs into the mainstream of Israeli economy. Later, I'm going to discuss why I think it's important for Israel, and I'll be followed by Helmi, who will describe. Helmi is the guy you've seen in the video presentation. He's going to elaborate on the particular specific programs the center has been performing for the last 20 years. I live in Tel Aviv. I'm married. I have 3 kids. My 2 boys serve in the army in elite units. My daughter's going to join them in a few months. And when I look at the reasons which led me to be involved in the integration of Arabs into the mainstream in Israel, I've identified 2 factors. One is my home upbringing and school, and the second is my professional career and strategy. I grew up in a religious, traditional home in Tel Aviv. My parents were traditional, and they've instilled Jewish value to me, and they've sent me to religious school. And I was taught to believe the Jews are special, not in terms of having more rights, but in terms of having more obligations. The Jews should seek justice. The Jews are responsible to correct wrongs, and that the real Jew should work toward tikkun olam, a correction of the world. When I grew up, Israel was small, fragile, and we were also taught that it was our responsibility, the responsibility of each and every one of us, to protect Israel and to make sure it was on the right track. So I grew up with these values, which led me to be more sensitive, more careful in looking at injustice, inequality, and to the poor and the disadvantaged. My mother, Judith, was born in Tel Aviv to a religious family. She participated in the War of Independence in '48, and she didn't share my political views. But when thieves broke into her house in Herzliya, where she left, and after she left for Tel Aviv, she told me, you know, poor thieves, there was nothing for them to take. And on her dying bed, when it was very difficult for her to talk, she heard that the United States have elected a black president, and she was elated. With tears in her eyes, she'd say, I've never expected that I'd live to see such a day. God bless the Americans for voting for electing a black president. So I had these values instilled in me from home. And I feel a special obligation, being a Jew, to take care of these things. A second influence, which I identify, is my professional career in strategy. I worked in strategy, M&A, and private investments. And many lessons can be drawn from strategy, but in this context, strategy taught me that it's important to identify the underlying forces behind the truth, behind the current situation, which begins to work before you identify them. And if you don't really identify these forces, you may end up being surprised. It's not good enough that the present looks good and everything looks fine. In many corporate settings, I was exposed to examples of this kind of, relying too much on present situation leads to difficulties, and obviously I cannot discuss such an examples. But now it's Sukkot, so I can discuss another example from Israel history. After the 6 Days War, 1967, in which Israel fought with Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, Israeli army reached the Suez Canal. Almost immediately started an attrition war between Israel and the Egyptians, each shelling the other across the canal. The Israeli army was impatient, so after some time Israel decided to use its overwhelming air force superiority and start bombing the western part of the Suez Canal, the Egyptian side. I was young at the time, but for some reason I recall an article wrote by a guy named Avneri, and he was just a reserve corporal, and he wrote that Israel's military strategy was based on air force superiority. But if after the 6 Days War, in which Israeli Air Force destroyed the Arab air forces in a few hours in the beginning of the war, the Egyptians didn't learn that they have to protect themselves from our airplanes, what we're doing now is very dangerous for